Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to share your story. Tell us more about what you're doing at Fiveable. And for people who aren't familiar today, what are you doing at Fiveable?
A whole lot. We are essentially building social learning spaces so that young people who are learning the same thing at the same time can find each other.
And one of the things that was just announced a week ago on your blog was Serena Williams invested. And I remember watching an interview of yours that was maybe 2 years ago talking about can't wait till we get some like bigger people on board, some names and everything. And then I literally just saw this a week ago. I was like, wait a minute, there it is. Like, take me through that. How did that come about? How you feel about that?
Yeah. In general, having investors like from the beginning that, have conviction in what you're building is like such a cool milestone to reach because you build this up in your head, you have this idea and to have other teammates, to have other people, put time and money behind it is incredible. To have those people be like famous people that I've looked up to is even more incredible. Chelsea Clinton invested in the last round, and like I remember the first time I was pitching her, I just was like just so nervous but she's just like such a cool person, and so it's the same thing, and so it's just been really awesome to have them back us.
Yeah, and that's one of those things you mentioned that too. I think about the people I've interviewed previously from other show, and I think about how yeah, you have that first interview with someone who's like a bigger name. You're like, oh my gosh, and then you're done. You're like, okay, like that was fine. I can do this. It's no big deal. And then it just becomes more like second nature for you. Then with taking a step back here with Fiveable, how did this get started in the first place, Amanda?
Yeah, so I was a teacher right out of college. I taught ninth and 10th grade history in Oakland for 5 years, and really loved my classroom, loved my students, loved teaching, but I just got really burnt out as a teacher because I think burnout is when you're super passionate about something and you just cannot make a difference in it. You just keep hitting walls. And that's what I felt. I just could not scale the difference I was making to the school, to the district. And it just got to a point where I was like, I gotta take a step back. I don't know what else I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna go adventure out there and see what else is out there. And after I did that, some of my former students, maybe halfway through that next school year, started emailing me and were like, Ms. D, you got to help us. We're all going to fail this AP US history exam. Our teacher is not teaching like you did. And just complete panic. I was now across the country and just thought, of course, like, let me help them. So I just started live streaming from them from my bedroom, which then was novel back in early 2018. But that is really the beginning of Fiveable. It came out of a need from my former students that then as a teacher, I started to really think about what is this problem that I'm actually solving for them, and how else can we solve it in a way that we can actually make a really big difference. Um, it's that, that scale that I wanted to hit as a teacher that I didn't even really understand what I was like yearning for. I think I was able to really experience that in the early stages of Fiveable, and now, especially now, as we've like really reached so many more students.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. We have so many like parallels in some ways because when I was training clients, I was a personal trainer right out of college, and actually in college, I was training clients, and I was realizing, I may work with 30 clients or 40 clients in a week, but I'll never be able to impact more lives than that if I don't do something else. And so when I started blogging more and creating more content around that, then I was realizing like I got random messages from people in different states being like, "Oh, this is so helpful," and I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute!" Like leveraging the scale of the internet, there's so many possibilities when it comes to educating people and teaching people. And that's why I reached out to you. I was like, oh, I have to talk to Amanda about what she did. And from that experience, then, so going from that though, you realize like you just want to help these former students, like you're going to live stream pretty easy. But at what point does that come to your mind? Like, hey, like this could be a much bigger thing, a venture-backed startup even. Like when does that come into play, Amanda?
Yeah, those early months were interesting because the first moment that I realized I was doing something that was even bigger than I had even imagined. I had spent a few weeks kind of understanding a little bit more about the creator space, and like, live streaming and building up any content like that online was not a skill that I built as a teacher. It was something that I kind of found out about later. And I just remember thinking like, the runway of things I can learn is massive. And I just found myself like tinkering in my room through the night. I couldn't focus on anything else. I was sparked in a way that I hadn't been in a long time. And I was working on a congressional campaign at the time, and I made this decision. I had no idea what I was really building yet. It was not Fiveable, but I was so fired up about what I was doing. And I decided that if I went 100% into something, I wanted to take that chance on myself. I didn't want to give 100% to that candidate or to anybody else. I wanted to just like take a shot on me and invest in me. And so I quit the campaign. I ended up moving back home with my mom in Maine and just sort of hunkered down. I had no plans. I didn't even know what I was getting myself really into. I don't know. There was something in me that just was like really fired up, and I loved what I was doing. And so I just thought, let me just go full force at this and see what happens. And that was the point where I was thinking, okay, if my students needed help, other students need help. And so I started sharing links to the live streams on Reddit and on different social channels and building up content. I created content on YouTube and I started reaching out. And so then as soon as there was this group of students from Dubai, they were waking up at 5 a.m. to watch my streams. And I was like,
Whoa.
clearly there's something special here, and I need to figure out how to harness it. What is the magic, and how do I build a business around it? And that took a lot of learning, and I didn't really think of myself as a startup for probably a few more months after that. But it's like a whole world opened up to me that I just didn't even know existed.
Well, let's talk to those early days in terms of that growth then, going from your students to people finding all over because you're posting links. So what was that, what were you doing at the time? So just trying to post it every time you had a live stream, you're like, hey, let's just share this out as many places as we can. Oh, we're getting more and more numbers. Like take me through that early growth stage till that point where we'll get to eventually of you raising money as well.
Yeah. So what became Fiveable, we think of our birthday as April 6th in 2018. So it was a few months before that I was working on creating content for AP World History because that was what I had taught. And so I just was like kind of becoming a YouTuber, which was really fun. And I was like building all this content. I was streaming for my students, but it didn't click for me yet that like that was part of the magic, and that just connecting students to each other is what I did well. And so in that early April, that's when it really transitioned into Fiveable. It also went to Fiveable because I was like, there are other subjects than history. I'm going to have to make space for them and learn them. And I kind of got into some like, understanding no code tools. Like I'm not a developer. I realized some of the different pieces. I just was learning a lot. I was like consuming so much information and trying to figure out how do I sell something to people I've never met? How do I message this? How do I build a website that like explains what I do? How do I get people to trust me? And so those were some of the early challenges is like, I'm a nobody. Who am I? Like, I don't have testimonials yet. How do I get these students to trust that I can actually help them? And it just that's where like you do things that don't scale sort of thing. But those were the first few hoops. And as people started paying for things, then you realize like there's a business here. If I can sell one, I can sell in infinite numbers.
Yeah. What were you charging for it? What was the product service at the time when you first started like doing that then?
It essentially was a cram series. It's not actually, funny enough, it's not that different from what we sell now. I think some of those early instincts were very right in how we set up the product and what students were buying. It's evolved a lot too, and we've tried out a lot of other things too, but those early days, It was, look, you got an AP World exam in May. We have 10 weeks or however many weeks we had, where I'm going to go through every unit to cover everything you need to know before the test. And the day before the test, we'll have a whole marathon review together. And so I was charging, I think then I was charging like $40, but the deal was like a lifetime, whatever else I sell, you get access to.
Yep.
And so that was what we did. And that's just, it's similar to what we do now. We don't have a lifetime deal anymore, but those were good days.
Yeah, those are huge to get those first like paying customers. I mean, that's everything. Especially like look at the past businesses I've started. It's the same thing. It's like getting those first customers to validate, those first few that pay you. Like it's a magical thing. Even if it's like a small amount, it's so magical to be like, wait a minute, this could be a possible thing. And like it gives you that kind of that hope, especially if you're a first time founder. It's like you don't know necessarily if this is going to be something that's valuable. And obviously, your students wanted it, but would someone pay for it? It's a different thing too. And that's something I want to get into in a bit about the payment. But first, I want to go back to that. You're staying at your mom's place, convincing people to join you in the Fiveable house. Talk me through that blog post I read. Like I have to know more because I'm so curious about it. How'd that happen?
Yeah. So fast forward, I had gone through an accelerator. I had moved in Utah. I did Betaboom that summer in the really early days. And then kind of going through the accelerator, I'm like, I'm going to raise money at the end. Everything is going to work out for me. And it did not in that moment. Like those early investors were really not pre-seed investors. That was like looking back, that was the mistake. I also only had a few pitches, and just in my head, I'm like, it'll be easy. I have the meeting, I'll get there. And everyone kind of looked at me and said like, this is cool, keep going, And so I had to make the decision then to move back to Maine, which at that point felt like my first like failure of like, I'm not making it as I thought I would. It feels like I'm moving backwards. It ended up being really powerful for me to do that, but I still, the folks from Betaboom around October invested in an additional $20K. And I had this decision. This was really not the first time, but the first big moment where I had to decide I have this really risky option and I have a more safe option. 20,000 at that point could get me through the school year. I could support the part-time teachers who were working with me. I could keep living with my mom and barely make it myself, but we could make it. I could stretch it. Or I could try to find other people that could work for us and maybe we make it 10 times faster. And I really had no idea how I would do that because $20,000 is not enough to actually hire people. And so then I thought, okay, if I go that path, how can I be creative in finding that early team? And so I took a page out of that campaign that I was working on. And actually I had done this before too, but essentially on the campaign, they had a group of us who were living in a house. They paid for the house and we were there for like 3 months and we like were part of the program. And it was kind of a wild offer. And they knew that it was like this crazy thing that they did. And I was like, I wonder if I could do the same thing. Like if I could get people to move into a house with me, I'll pay the rent. None of us are paying ourselves yet, but maybe we can get there. Maybe we can build it together. And also I needed to leave my mom's house. I was getting to a point where I was like, it's time to leave the nest. So
yeah, it's fair.
I pitched the crazy idea to those first advisors from Betaboom. They were like, that's insane, but if anyone can do it, probably you. So like worth a shot. And so I put up the blog post and Tan, who is my co-founder now, saw it on Reddit, applied, moved in 2 weeks later, and we still live together today. So the lesson I learned is that people will buy into your mission and your vision and you as a person. And in the early days, like that's the thing you have to sell them on. It can't be anything else. It's not the perks or the salary. It's like you're joining the trenches with me and you have to really believe what we're doing is right.
Yeah, and being on the investor side of it and seeing that and getting pitches and everything as well, we want that. Obviously, that narrative has to be tight around like, what are you building? Why are we investing in this? And then that team side of it, it's like to that point, you're able to convince people to join you in this house is like a huge step in, okay, you can convince other hires later on to join you because especially people who are talented, who are A players, they have options. Like they can work at multiple companies, they can work in all different industries, probably make a lot more money than a startup. why are they working with you? And like being able to showcase that is like such a huge thing for investors on our side to be like, oh yeah, like Amanda, like she's gonna do things, like she can do this. One of the things I want to go back to though, like even before all this, I kind of glossed over it, but I'm curious about it. You moved out of the state for Betaboom to join this accelerator. How many other accelerators were you looking at? Why Betaboom? Like why even accelerator? Like I want to know more about that.
So in the first few months when I was at my mom's house, my parents had a business when I was growing up, and my grandparents had businesses. There was always entrepreneurship, but never at this scale. And so I was very much in a world that my mom was like, trying to support me as much as she could, and has always been. I think of her as like my senior advisor at this point. But we would actually watch Shark Tank together, and she would pause it to whatever Cuban asked and say like, "Can you answer that?" And I would do my best, and I couldn't usually, and then I would run back upstairs and work on some new projections or plan. And so that was something we did together. And in that process, I was Googling a lot, right? Like just trying to figure out what were those words that he just said. What is this thing that I have to figure out? In Googling, I literally just got a Google ad for Betaboom. And I remember this moment. I was sitting on on the couch in our living room, and I looked at my mom and I was like, "Did you know that I could actually access investors?" And she was like, "No, like I don't know this space." And I just had no idea. I saw Shark Tank and I saw, Silicon Valley. I had no idea that I could actually pitch someone, that someone would invest in the company that I was building. And that moment changed everything, because then I started Googling about accelerators. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a whole world out there. So many of them. I started applying to, I think at that point I only applied to a few. I applied to Generator, funny enough, which comes back later. I applied to YC, which I was in no way prepared for. And I applied to Betaboom. And to this day, I honestly, sometimes I don't know exactly what it was that got that shot for Betaboom, but I think they just saw like, she's going to figure it out. The passion is just like there, and like something will happen from this.
Hearing that, I mean, again, on the investor side, like just hearing that, like, okay, someone like you, so someone like Amanda, like a talented, has this great idea, you're gonna crush it, like didn't know about accelerators. It was like obviously such a huge gap in terms of knowledge, or like what is possible on the funding side. And like we've heard this story over and over again, underrepresented founders being able to do more with less, like repeatedly. And like there's so much talent out there, like all across the country, all across the world, that if you don't know about the sources of capital or the like accelerators and things, like you're just missing out on something. But it's like you don't know what you don't know. And so hearing that, it's just like I want to help spread the word too on things like accelerators or things like, VC or angels, because a lot of people didn't know. Like being from Milwaukee, I didn't really know about venture capital until I got like my MBA. Like, I started like really getting my MBA at USC and then talking to founders that were venture backed to learn more about the ins and outs of it. But that was 20 something years in my life. So it's like so many other people in that same position who have an idea, try to bootstrap, maybe it doesn't work, and that's it for them, where really they could have been potentially a venture scalable business. And that's so interesting to hear that. And what crazy Google ads to get a Betaboom.
I mean,
Like that's
honestly,
insane.
a paid ad changed my life. But
That's insane.
to that
Take
point,
me through.
exactly, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
As I studied education in college, I went this path of like, I'm going to become a teacher. I became a teacher. I only knew teachers. I think a lot about teachers, because education is this space that like needs so much work. There are problems to be solved for students, parents, teachers, admins, schools, districts, across the board. And a lot of the people that work in that environment really don't have a connection to what actually happens in tech. They don't necessarily, they aren't coders, more likely than not. They don't know no
Yeah.
code tools. They don't necessarily know these spaces, but they could be creating these amazing solutions. And I think about them a lot, mostly because in the last few weeks, I think this school year has really been the last straw for a lot of people. In the last few weeks, there's so many teachers that are just like, I can't do this anymore. And I just think a lot about that. And I think about other industries like that. To your point, exactly. You only know what you know, and how many amazing solutions are out there. Amazing founders are out there that just have not tapped into that yet. They just don't even know that they can or that it's even there. So I think we try to approach it through students, but there's work to be done for sure.
Yeah, and to that point, like there's just so many people who have a specialty expertise, like teaching or like anything else, where it's like, wait, if you combine that with understanding of the tech and the things that we're seeing now, the possibilities are endless. And like I was just talking to this morning, the founder of Codecademy, who started this massive things with tens of millions of learners now learning code. And like they're not trying to do boot camps, not trying to do anything else. They have like a reasonable price point to get people to that next step, whether it be upskilling or whether it be career switching potentially. But it's like you learn that when you have the tech side and you combine that with the education piece, a lot of magic can happen, but you're not seeing both sides of it from all the founders because they don't even know it's a possibility, which is why I'm chatting with you today. I want to learn more about how you've done it. And you mentioned Generator. Where did that come into play? I had talked to Eric Martel previously, a different podcast. He used to be the managing director of Generator Minneapolis. He went through Generator for his company. Tell me about Generator and your experience, Amanda.
Yeah. So when I had decided to create that first Fiveable house, we moved to Philly, and within weeks we were out of money. I mean, just like it happened so much faster than I thought it would. We would go to like the canned food aisle and be like, pick something. And
yeah.
So we had to really figure out at that point, like, how do we keep going? How do we make more sales, or how do we get investors? And I really had to deal with that like kind of chicken and egg problem then of build the business to get investors, but we need capital to build the business. And so I had decided to apply to a couple of accelerators, even though I knew I had done one. I just really didn't have a way into like angels, and I really didn't know how to navigate pre-seed. I felt really removed from it all, but I knew that an accelerator could help. I mean, that $100,000 was huge, and we needed the network. And so I applied. We went through the interview process and got in. And it was like this, it was another moment of just, I don't know, it felt like a mixture of luck and timing and a lot of hard work that just like kind of paid off. And that one program was in Madison in Wisconsin. I had never been to Wisconsin before until I flew out to pitch live. And I hadn't even at that point met my CTO in person yet. We had met the first time during that pitch, which the people from Generator didn't know then, but they know now. And we just decided to do it. And so we broke our lease in Philly and packed everything we had into my car and moved out to Madison and just kind of went all in on that. And that really helped us actually like accelerate us, right? Like a lot of the investors that did invest in our pre-seed round came from those connections, even though it still took me another 7-ish months to get that round closed. Those folks were people I met through Generator, and it kind of kicked off a lot of those relationships that are still really important today.
Yeah, the power of an accelerator, I mean, it goes without saying why people want to get into it. Obviously, capital is one part of it, but really that network. And I've talked to people who've gone through Generator, who've gone through YC, Techstars, and it's that same thing. Again, back to that point of first-time founders or people who just don't have those networks. Like, how do you build a network much faster? Mm-hmm. And you build a network much faster if you go through a program like that, in terms of getting that then access to capital that is helpful for you. And in that program itself though, so take me through some of the things in terms of growth with the company in that, or like working with your CTO. Like tell me about that aspect of it as well in Generator.
Yeah, so we were a team of 4 at that point. 3 of us were in the Fiveable house, and so we just moved the Fiveable house to Madison. And then Austin, who was our CTO then, was in Chicago, so we were close. Those what was it, 12 weeks of the program were some of the like wildest weeks. The way that their program works is that you meet a lot of people very fast. It's a lot of like almost speed dating of like mentors, investors. Their hypothesis is really kind of a shots on goal. Like the more people you meet, the more chances you are to like get further. It happened to be at the same time as the AP exams. So we did everything at the same time. We were meeting with all these people, building the new pitch deck, creating strategy and learning from the cohort, but also executing on our first full cram season with 7 subjects. And I mean, nobody slept for just like 2 weeks straight. It was like, it was wild. I mean, it was just a completely wild experience, but cram seasons for us are huge. And so we went from my first cram season by myself, I taught 2,500 students. That next year during Generator, we taught 25,000 students. And so it just jumped really fast, and it was a lot, but it was really like, we learned a lot really fast.
Okay, going from that experience then. So I remember talking to Zuleika Strossner from Zero, and she, I think, took like 10 months to raise her round as well for Zero Grocery. We eventually invested in them at Vitalize as well, but 10 months is a long time. I mean, 8 to 10 months, somewhere in that range is a long time. And you just mentioned how, you took 7 months or so after Generator to really close that round. Take me through that process. You got past the cram season then with the craziness of Generator as well. But then after that, raising your round, especially for other founders who haven't raised capital and trying to raise a pre-seed round, take me through how that kind of came together for you, Amanda.
Yeah, that stretch of time was maybe one of the hardest times at Fiveable, because 100,000 from Generator goes quick. We weren't making revenue enough to get to a point where we could really move forward. We also needed to start paying ourselves. We had kind of hit our own limits and how long we could stretch it. Yeah. And we had teachers. And so we had decided to expand how many subjects we were supporting. And so we had more teachers who were working part-time. I had built up a whole round that summer right after Generator. I had it going, and we were going to raise 600,000, and then it fell apart. The lead investor, things changed, other people changed, everything just fell apart, right kind of overnight. And that was a devastating moment. I remember just walking around this neighborhood, just in just shambles, just thinking how am I ever going to keep it going? The thing that kept me going actually was that very first year because I had sold these lifetime subscriptions, I could not get out of my head that there were students who were expecting Fiveable to still exist. And if it didn't, they would think that I lied to them, which I just was never trying to do. And so there was this little thing for me that I was like, it has to exist. They're expecting it. We have to find a way. And so I had to call staff and not pay people for, a couple weeks or months on end. We just kept trying to push on things of how do we make this happen? We found our very first angel investor who did invest and really helped bridge those few months a little bit. And then eventually got to a point where we did have a lead which was Northwestern Mutual in Milwaukee. And that one commit, now all these other people who I've been building relationships with were like, all right, well, if they're in, let's do it. And so then we were able to put together that 600,000 round and close that right before New Year's. And it was we had less than a couple thousand in the bank by the time the money actually hit. We were days away from just I don't know how to keep going. So it was wild, and as soon as it ended, I still was now we got to figure out how to do it again. You got to keep going. Now how do we spend it?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. So I've asked a lot of people before. It's okay, raising capital. Oh, you're doing that for the first time. Great. But you've also probably never had $2 million to spend, so it's how do you think about that as well? And obviously in that whole process of fundraising, you're knowing what the, use of capital is going to be and everything. But it's one thing to know that, and then not sure if you're going to close, and then you close, and then it's oh, well, now we're executing this plan.
Yeah.
Which is a whole different thing.
Both rounds that we've raised, I feel the day after the round, you feel this massive relief. Of course, the money has hit the bank. This is real. We've closed it. We did it. But then I don't know that I've ever been more stressed out than those 2 days, because of that exact reason. Because then it's $20,000 when I first raised that sounded like an unbelievable amount of cash, like to keep going up. Like I didn't know how to, it's exactly what you're saying. Like you have these ideas of how you're going to use the capital, but it's not real until it's real. And then you are like, what if I mess it up? Now there's all these other people that are actually invested in this. It's not just me and, a few other students. There's capital involved. There's people involved. Now we got to salary ourselves and hire people. And now we're going to run out. Now I can see a runway. I should have raised more. And now I'm like, oh no.
Well, it's like there's so many expectations then, right? I mean, that's the thing that comes along with the money. It's not just, hey, here's $2 million, Amanda, go ahead. It's like with the expectation that this is going to grow. We know we like what you're doing, but this needs to grow into X for you to hit these milestones for the next round. And that's something that, yeah, it's tricky. It's like not obviously easy, and it's not something that, especially if you haven't been there, to stomach that. It's crazy. And I think about how, we hear these valuations and these fundraisers on in TechCrunch or whatever over and over again. It's like, yeah, $10 million, $5 million, $20 million. I just get numb to it. But then when you actually think about it, like someone who's a first-time founder, especially, it's like, yeah, here's a couple $1 million if you grow this business. You never have raised capital before. It's like, that's crazy. And like, I still think that I've never been venture back myself in my own companies. I've always bootstrapped. So when I think about it from that perspective, it's like, that's wild to think about having that and then actually like trying to execute on that.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's really stressful. And I think that those days are times when you really need friends who are also founders that you can call, because you can't, it's not like there's no complaining, right? It's like you are so endlessly excited and happy to be at that stage, to have unlocked that next, you unlocked that capital, you did it. But it's hard to then, that's when you can feel really lonely, because then you are the one on the team that's also really stressed out about what to do with it. And it's hard to talk to your investors about that. It's hard to talk about that with your just non-founder friends, because they're like, but isn't this a good thing? And you're like, yeah, this is a great thing. But there's a lot of stress and anxiety that comes with it. And so you've got to have people around you too that you can talk to that just get it, that know that it's the best day and it's a really stressful day too. And like how to then, it's imposter syndrome, right? It's like navigating all these different feelings. And so you just need people in your corner that you can just be really honest with about that.
Yeah, so many founders, again, that I've talked to, it's the same thing. They get other founders in their corner, have meetings. Again, that meeting today with Zach from Code Academy, he's talking about he has like a weekly chat with another one of his founder friends. And then he has like a monthly get together with a bigger group of founder friends, because again, like you need that support from people who get it, people who are going through, especially at the same stage as you, is super helpful. It's like a combination of people in the same stage and people a little bit farther along with you. Like it's so helpful to have that. And from that perspective though, so you raised a couple $1 million late last year. You announced to Serena Williams and Serena Ventures, like her investing as well. So raised around $4 million or so, gotten to 600,000 students now, though. That's impressive.
That was just last month.
Yeah. Like, okay, take me through that growth in the last year or so. Yeah. What's fueled that growth for you guys?
For us, we really started out focused on AP because that's what I taught and that's what my students had needed. And I think in the first few years, obviously we were really like managing the stress of raising those early rounds. But I think since January 2020 is when we really like, okay, now we have some money, we have backers, like now we're doing it. We really decided, okay, let's double down on AP. Like, let's really prove this out with AP. There's 36 subjects. We were doing 7. There's more work to do here. Let's create the actual like program that we can sell. And then let's also build a machine of acquisition. Like, how do we meet students where they are in a way that can still be affordable for us? Like, this was something we had started back when we really had nothing. But for us, it was about creating content and building on SEO and knowing that young people are Googling their homework. They're all doing that. They're on social, they're on YouTube. And so how do we lean into those behaviors to then really fuel the growth? And it takes a lot of time. SEO is a strategy that a lot of founders think about, and way less founders actually do it. because it's not something you can see the results of overnight. But for us, it's definitely been a huge piece of our puzzle, because we've been able to, I mean, it took us a long time, but we created study guides for every unit of every AP subject. We have a whole team of students and teachers who build that content. And the community itself, it's just sort of like, it's, a lot of work to like build that trust and build those spaces. And you eventually get to a point where then they're all telling their friends about it. And that's kind of where we're at now. And so now we're sort of on the cusp of our 4th cram season and expecting just a lot more than 600,000 students next month.
Yeah, I'm sure that number will jump tremendously. And I want to dive into that content piece again, because that's something where I've been creating for so long and thinking about that constantly. And again, thinking about the entrepreneurs I've talked to who are in that same space, who decided to go the SEO route. I mean, that's something that can take 6, 8, 10 months before you're really seeing much traction from that. Was it a matter of you just saw that as really the only option based on what the students were doing and that you needed to do? Or how did you think through that, or any alternatives that what you could have possibly done besides the SEO kind of focus?
We first started that strategy back in the winter of 2018, like in like December, right when I was doing like first launch the Fiveable house. And the reason why I did it was because I really wanted to meet students where they are. And I knew that they were all Googling their homework. I did not want to go the route of selling to schools, and I didn't really want to work with schools at all because I had left that, right? Like I left it and I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And I felt like the school systems were blockers in a lot of ways to resources. And, this is not a knock on every school, of course, but like, it's a tough space. And so in that initial decision of like, go to schools, go to students, I was like, I'm going to students. Students are more fun. I can find them. And SEO, with AP, I could create a lot of content. I could just sit down and write, and I could learn how to do it. And Tan, who is my co-founder, knew SEO, and so he, being one of the first people that joined, it's like I had taken us from maybe 0 to like 0.5 in the SEO journey, and then he took us to 10, and then we brought on another person, a year later, LG, that took us to 100. I mean, it takes a lot of work to do it, and it takes a lot of content, a lot of optimizing, a lot of strategy. But we just felt like that was going to bring the users that we wanted, that we could build the business that we wanted, and that strategy fit really well into where we wanted to go.
And I want to double click on that, because for other founders who are interested in going this route, you mentioned there's obviously some complexities and taking it from 0.5 to 10 or 100 and then and beyond. What are some of those things? I'm happy to get into the gritty details, because I'm really curious about this, that go into that SEO strategy, producing that content, because that is a lot of content. Like, I'm curious on some things that you've taken away that have been helpful for you to do
it's
that.
It's a lot of content. I mean, so the 3 pillars that I essentially talk about whenever I'm supporting other founders in this too. The first is you have to identify the content that you want to target, those keywords. You have to really understand like who are the people that you want to attract and what are they searching. And of those keywords, which ones can you actually target? Which ones are competitive and which ones are more low hanging fruit? And then it's about actually creating the content to meet those keywords, and the content itself has to be awesome. Like, you have to really understand like when a student Googles this, what are they going to see, and how do I create something that's 10 times better than that? And then there's all the like technical optimization of that, like your website itself, the speed of it, the way that the piece of content itself is structured, and the URL, and that's where I was like, okay, I know students are studying AP World, have to get through these units. I have this list of units. I can write these unit reviews. Now I'm stuck. So that's where I hit my first wall. Tan was like, I got this. I wrote like 50 blog posts over that like Christmas break, just like, and he was like, okay, I can optimize this. I can build this site. And then the last bucket is about like backlinks, is like, you got to get people actually linking to you. You have to prove to Google that you are an authority in this space. And so all those buckets are always a work in progress. We are constantly looking for new keywords, creating new content, re-optimizing, and looking for people to link to things. And that's what makes it really hard, because you need someone that's like fully focused on it to really make it happen.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm having done some of that before, and as I got more into that with the fitness company and the blogging, and I was learning more. Wait a minute, like if I actually target some of these keywords, it's a little bit better than before. And what are people searching? And I figured out different ways to go about that. Sometimes it's like I found like celebrity workouts were actually an easy way to like target keywords, and I could win those. So I was ranking ahead of like men's health and men's fitness on like a lot of different workouts and stuff, because you can look them up and then you kind of back into that and then look at their content that make yours better and longer. And you're like, oh, there you go. And then so it's a lot of factors that go into it. But I think it's interesting to always hear those strategies, because it can be so helpful for other founders. But one of the things too that you mentioned, and I've seen on your website, is this massive team of people around you, one being the core team, but also like the helpers and the advisors and like all of that. Okay. How do you manage that? Like, what does that look like in terms of them being on board and helping in what capacity? Because like, as soon as I saw that page, my mind was just like twirling. I'm curious how you manage all that, Amanda.
It's a lot of people. And I think to your point earlier of why those early investors invested, because they could, if I can convince people to live in this house, I can build this team. I think that kind of played out pretty quickly. And I always, in the beginning, one of the things that I felt like was my competitive advantage was that I really understood students. I worked with students. I worked at a school. I knew how they think, how they operate, how they behave, like what they actually do. And there's no way I'm going to be able to hire all former teachers, and there's no way that we're all going to be able to spend time working in a school. So I just started hiring students, because what I really wanted to be true was that every one on my team worked directly with a high school student every single day. It's a unique thing that we do, because most people don't spend time working with 16-year-olds on their team. But it's huge for us because, one, it really connects every single person on our team to the student experience and like how they actually work. And it means that there's always a student in the room to help us make decisions, whether that's what, subdomain should this be on, or like how does this copy look, or what product features should we focus on. They're part of every decision. And it makes it so that everyone on our team is also a leader. And that was huge, because I also knew that we're going to scale the team. There's going to be a lot of people. I can't manage all those people. And so we just now have a really tight team structure where every person that works for Fiveable on our full-time team is 19. All of them have interns. That some of them have interns. Like all of there's a lot of different like kind of hierarchies within that, but it's like, there are 70, I think, interns that work with us now. There's 50 teachers. There's the full-time team. There's the part-time team. So it takes a lot of folks to make it happen. And you have to create the structure so that it's like not you that it's in managing all those people. I then get to work with a lot more of the investors or the mentors, and then my leadership team, and also making sure that everyone on my team also has mentors as well. Right? Like keeping the network really open. So, a lot of those folks, they're like creating a little like kind of board of advisors for anyone that's on the team, right? Like who are the people that you can go to that's not me, that you can get help from. And so it's just, I think we just really like leaned into the people and the ways that we like bring people into what we're doing.
Yeah, and it reminds me of like having like, you have a mentee basically below you. You have your partners, and you also have mentors. Like all three levels all kind of matter, and I think they're important for different ways for you to be able to obviously direct people around, but also get help from people who are in the trenches with you. But then get that kind of higher level, someone who has maybe done it before or just has a different perspective as well to help you grow your business. And one of the things too, one of the last things here, I know we're getting out of time, is just looking at building in public and like essentially you blogging about some of the things you've done over the past couple of years. And like those have been critical for you to find people, like your CTO, for instance. How has that impacted you, and why you decide to do that, to like share your story as you're building the company?
In the really early days, I was really afraid to talk about what I was doing because I had this thing in my head of like, when I'm successful, I'll let everyone know what I've done. And I think that's common, and I
Hmm.
hear it from founders a lot because I always tell people like start an email list and just let people in your life know what went well and what didn't go well and what you need help with. And I always sense, you know, people are hesitant because they're like, well, let me get to this milestone first. And it was actually like a really random person that I had met in Philly that had wasn't even in startups, but she was working on her own company. And I feel like she kind of like held this mirror to me in this like totally random conversation that was like, this journey is what's important. Like you need to bring people in throughout because there is no end point. It's like you're just going to keep going. You're going to have moments where you like you you get to celebrate and you're excited and you're proud, and there's other moments where you feel alone and it feels really hard, and you have to be willing to ask for help and bring people into those to both of those feelings. And so that really pushed me to be a lot more open with things. And I also really thought about myself as a founder that had never heard of these things before, had never seen someone like me in this space. And I
Yeah.
just thought like whether Fiveable becomes a, $1 billion company or something goes wrong along the way, if I can if I can walk through the door and hold that door open for other people to come after me, then it's worth it, right? Like it's the journey. Like it's whether we make it or not is not about how we then like go through the process. Like there's so many other people that we can inspire along the way that will build things. Like all the students that are in our ecosystem. I want them to see what we're doing and how and why it's hard and why it's fun, because it helps them understand that they can do something too, and that they can actually see themselves making it happen. So I guess I just I feel like it's my responsibility to like to be open about it, and there's a lot of benefits to that too, like meeting people.
Yeah, and that's something I just like created a video recently about creating a serendipity flywheel. And when you create things on the internet and you share things on the internet, you have this serendipity flywheel. People have the ability to find you, whether it be partners, investors, potential hires, customers, whatever, where they see that. And then as you build this serendipity flywheel of putting yourself out there and putting your story out there, more people follow along. And then the next time you put your story out there again, more people follow along and share it. And then it just becomes this flywheel where good things can happen to you over and over again. And that's why I kind of always encourage people to do that, to kind of document their journey, what they're doing. Because like you said, it's so inspirational, especially for people who don't know about it. And one of the blocks I've heard from people is like, well, like I'm not successful, like you said, like, but at the same time, like what level are you compared to someone else? Because like even if you've raised your first funding, that's one step more than anyone who hasn't raised funding before, which is a lot of people. And so they can find that valuable. And that's where I enjoy sharing those types of stories in interviews such as this, because I think other people see that and are like, wait a minute, like, oh, like that's what I could do that too. And it makes it more real because like I said before, like I never saw these things super early when I was growing up. And like only from books when I started to read about, oh, these entrepreneurs creating businesses and then reading about venture capital and kind of seeing it more than, really in person now in the last couple of years of like how people are doing it who are, no different than really anyone else in many ways. They just figure it out and try to do it. So it becomes a real. So I appreciate you sharing that. And as we kind of wrap things up here, what is the big vision for Fiveable moving forward? What's next for you guys, Amanda?
For us, I think the big the big vision, we come back to this all the time. Just yesterday again, we're like in the leadership again, like what do we want out of this? For us, it's really about, there are so many young people. Like I think about high school students, college students, like that stage of life is very, it's hard. You don't necessarily, you're trying to figure out what you want to do, and the access to resources is so inequitable across the world, right? Like there's these like milestones that you're supposed to hit, but actually being able to get the support to do that is so difficult. And there's constantly the like haves and the have nots. And we talk about education as being this like opportunity driver, right? That this is what can bridge that gap between that. But even education itself is like inaccessible for so many people. And so for us, I think the way that I see solving for that globally is by connecting students to each other, right? It's not about, it's like a decentralization of that, right? It's not about us having this content that is like amazing and is going to change everyone's life. There's a lot of content out there that's amazing that can change everyone's life. But instead, it's about like, how do we actually connect students to each other so that they can share what they have, right? There's a teacher that gave you this way to remember this concept, and that teacher's advice can now be widespread. There's a student that's found this like really important resource that they can share, and now they've impacted more people. Even to the extent of like, when you go to school, a lot of times you feel like, or you are the only one who X. You're the only Black student. You're the only, you feel like you're the only student that likes, this, you like to write creatively. You want to study physics, and you're like, does anyone else care about this? I think in order to really support students in bridging that gap, it's about connecting students in these types of communities so that they can find each other when they're learning the same thing at the same time. And if we can do that, then I think we've found a way around some of these larger systems that are making these decisions that don't actually involve the students, and it puts the power back in the students' hands.
Amanda, where can people go to learn more and connect with you as well if they'd like to?
Yeah, so our website is fiveable.me, and there's lots of AP content there, but there's also all of our about us and whatnot. And, you can find us on any social channel at Think Fiveable.
Amanda, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.